having to keep my body thin was a full-time job.
It's a must-watch Intentional Living.
It came to a point where I couldn't be thin and have a relationship.
As we take on today's impossible beauty standards with body acceptance coach, Kristina Bruce.
I was trapped. I felt the stress, and I was like, I can't do this anymore.
From the dangerous focus on thin thinking.
I was so deeply suffering mentally, emotionally, even physically, because we are so conditioned to believe that a thin body equals a healthy body.
To the truth about our obsession with body image.
You know, I was hoping that if enough people thought I was good enough, maybe I might feel good enough.
It all stems down to that self-worth. We're breaking down what it truly means to feel good and love ourselves again.
I did not come into this world thinking that my body was wrong. It's these ideas that get conditioned in our mind that cloud over that sense of okayness and worth. And so we got to start to sift through those clouds. We have to start questioning what is actually beautiful.
On an all-new Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers. Before we get into the show, I've got a question. Are you in optimal health? Well, if you're anything like me, I'm sure you're just as confused and overwhelmed with all the information, rules, and advice out there for living your best life. And to make matters worse, you don't know where to turn to get some clarity.
We have to ask ourselves, why is that happening?
But lucky for you, I've got someone that can help.
I made it a part of my mission. Well, I'm going to learn everything I can about health, and happiness, and healing, and thriving, and what that means to be an optimal human. And I'm going to just scream it from the rooftops.
My friend Samantha Lotus has got a new course that will break down everything you need to know to optimize your life and get your health journey back on track.
We have to move away from these rigid structures of like, you have to be this way, and you have to do this way, and you have to eat this, and you have to follow this. And like, I don't think that's where it's at.
I know this because she has personally helped me wean off unnecessary medication. She's created a wellness kit for me so that I can optimize my own personal health goals. And she's opened my awareness to the work-life health connection.
That's where it starts.
She's so good at what she does. I know you'll be racing to sign up for her course. Just take a listen to her on episode 99 of Intentional Living, and you won't want to wait.
It's about finding what works for us, and being in the trial and error, and allowing it to be messy and imperfect, and having a lot of grace and compassion with the journey.
Check out Optimum by Samantha Lotus. It's linked below. And if you use my special code, Courtney, you'll get $100 off the course.
It is that balance, and it's finding the right equation for you.
Don't miss out. Welcome to Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers, a podcast dedicated to those seeking a more fulfilled and purposeful life through thought-provoking conversation, spiritual exploration, and authentic connections. The intentional movement has begun, and if you found yourself here, you are a part of it. Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers starts now. Hi, Kristina. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers. I'm so happy to meet you and have you join us today.
Thank you so much for having me here. I look forward to this discussion.
I do too, because this whole concept of intuitive eating, I talk about intuition a lot. I talk about spirituality a lot. And we are always talking about going within to find our authentic self and really find that self-worth and love for ourselves so that we can show up who we truly want to be in the world. It's one of the main topics we talk about, but I think one of the other big topics that I haven't even really gone into is the whole idea of our body image and how our outside appearance and what we present to the world so greatly impacts how we feel inside. And I know you are an expert on this. I know you've had your own journey with this and struggle with it. And now you help others kind of go within and learn to love themselves so that we can show up as our best self inside and out. So I'm really excited to hear your story. Let's start there. And then we can kind of dive into like that, how we get there, how we learn to accept ourselves.
Yeah. Do you have 3 hours, Courtney? Is this a 3-hour podcast?
Yes. We'll do part 1 and 2 and 3 and we're good.
I tease, but of course, this is such a broad discussion and impacts us in so many ways. I find particularly women, and I could literally talk about it forever, but I will start with my story, as you asked. So for me, I really first became aware of it. And for me, it was really all about body size. So it was about weight. And yes, a bit about appearance in terms of, beauty standards, but more so it was really centered around weight for me. And I really became aware that if I was in a thinner body, that was good. Like that meant that my mind interpreted it when I was young that I'd be more worthy of love, because it started where this image is like burnt into my mind. We would often go to my aunt's house and my family would gather there. And so my grandma was there and my aunt was there. And my sister and I would walk in, and there was this little door frame leading into the living room. And we were standing, both of us side by side in this door frame. And my sister was in a smaller body than me. So she was always thinner than I was as a child. And we come in and they always start to ask us, it's been a little while since I've seen us. What are you up to? How's things been going? And I was always into sports and activities when I was young. So I would tell them all about the activities I was doing and how I did, and, really excited to share this. And my sister tended to be a little bit more chill in that regard. She wasn't so active. And so she was a little bit more like, oh, school's good, whatever. And then after she was finished, they all made this comment about how thin she was. So like, oh, and you're so thin. Like, oh my God, you see how thin she is. And I remember this distinct feeling of like me sharing what I was excited about and what I was working towards didn't garner kind of that same admiration and excitement that her being in a thin body did. I noticed that. I think I was maybe, I want to say between 8 and 10, I'm not sure. And my sister was younger than me. And that really stuck out. That was the first moment where I felt like I'm not good enough because my body isn't small. And I would be better and I would be more worthy of their attention and their adoration if I was in a thin body. Now, thankfully, I think because I was so active and passionate about all the things I was doing growing up, I was a softball player and a dancer when I was younger, and et cetera, I spent a lot of my school years and even through high school just really into what I was doing. And so the body image stuff was kind of in the background, but it wasn't front and center, which was great. It wasn't until I had graduated from university and I was like out on my own for the first time in the world, that idea of how do I want to be in the world? How do I want to present myself was important. That wasn't conscious to me, but I could see now that that's what was coming up. Also, too, I was single, so I wanted to date. And there were also another kind of poignant memory that I had too, reinforcing this idea that my appearance wasn't really up to par. And this was, I think, around 12, 13. So, of course, that lovely, sensitive, puberty age.
Yeah.
And I remember a guy coming up to me and saying, your sister's prettier than you. And I'm like, I didn't really know what to say about that. I'm like, okay, like, thanks for the information. So that one really stung. And I'm like, gosh, it's really all about appearance, and whatever the standard is out there, I don't measure up. And I was definitely achievement-oriented, perfectionist style, which really comes from this place of feeling not good enough. And that really lingered. That was present for me throughout a lot of my life, as long as I can remember. I was always really hard on myself, trying to be better, trying to be enough. And I was receiving this message over and over again that if I was thinner, I would be better. And that in my mind meant I would be enough. I'd be worthy, I'd be valuable. So I did what we're all told to do, which is just diet and exercise. And so I really was restrictive with my food, not severely, but just was watching it and exercising. And very quickly, I lost weight. And that is very typical of people who are doing this for the very first time. So the first time you go on a diet, most people tend to lose weight, a certain amount of weight fairly easily. So I noticed that I started getting more attention because I'd lost weight, most often from guys. So guys who wouldn't have given me the time of day before were all of a sudden paying attention to me. This was reinforced with more comments from guys in my friend group and telling me things like, we talk about how hot you are now. And I remember thinking, oh, like part of me was like, okay, that feels sort of weird to know that they're really looking at me that way. Kind of felt good. And then on the other hand, I felt really sad because I thought, well, I've known these people now for years and
right.
I'm still the same person. But the only thing that's changed is I've lost weight. And all of a sudden it seemed like that, in their eyes made me better. So as much as on the one hand, I was trying to lose weight to feel better, deep down, that wasn't it was still the feeling of not being good enough that was always there. So anyways, it really then also kind of reinforced this thought of, oh crap, I can't gain this weight because if I do, what are people going to be thinking of me now? Well, they're definitely not going to think I'm as pretty or as good enough because evidenced by these comments. And I'm just not sure I can handle that. I really don't think I can handle that. So I spent a lot of my 20s and into my 30s very focused on keeping my body size down. And I kind of liken it to holding a beach ball underwater. So, the moment it got too hard, as soon as I let go, that beach ball would just pop right up through the surface and my weight would immediately start to go up because my body was not happy at a thin size because that's not how my body structure is built. If really naturally, we can talk about the intuitive aspect. If I'm intuitively listening to what feels good to me, my body size is higher. But because, of course, in this culture that is hyper focused on appearance and values thinness practically above all else, it seems, it was very clear to me that just felt way too scary. And I couldn't handle feeling like other people didn't accept me or think I was good enough because I didn't think I was good enough. So, I was hoping that if enough people thought I was good enough, maybe I might feel good enough eventually. Now, during this time, I was really more into, personal development, spiritual exploration. And so I was on this path and always just such a passion and interest to mine. And in school, I had a degree in health studies. So I was always interested in wellness and health and well-being. So I explored this more for myself. I became a yoga teacher. I, would go on retreats and just kept exploring it. I came across the work of Byron Katie, which is a wonderful self-inquiry methodology, and just, really was open and involved to all of the teachers of our day, masters and also personal development gurus, and really in that world for myself. And I started, especially through the work of Byron Katie, questioning these beliefs, questioning beliefs that hurt, as she would say, question the beliefs that cause suffering for you. And so I started to become aware that, oh my goodness, these thoughts that go on in my head aren't true. They're not necessarily true. It's just I couldn't see them because they felt so real. So these thoughts that tell me I'm not good enough, these thoughts that, say I'm not worthy, they're not actually true, but they just felt so true. And it was hard to really break through that. But little by little, I started to open up a bit more. And so at this workshop, I went to one of she has this workshop called the 9-day School for the Work. I actually met my then boyfriend, now husband, and he moved in with me. And it became really clear at that point when he moved in, because prior to that, I was living on my own, that having to keep my body thin was a full-time job, in addition to my other full-time job. So if I wanted a relationship and have some flexibility with my time and schedule, it came to a point where I couldn't be thin and have a relationship. It was actually damaging my relationship trying to keep my body thin. So when he first moved here, he moved from another country, so it couldn't work. He was making dinners and cleaning the house, which was great. But I would come home from work, and if dinner wasn't ready right away, I would lose it. And I was so worried about, did he put more dressing on on the salad that is required? Oh no, did he do, how much of this rice did he measure? Did he measure it out? Because that was how hard I had to be with my food in order to keep my weight down. And so I would be upset with him. I would be so distraught because food wasn't ready. And I didn't know it at the time, but it was like I was semi-starving all the time. And so that's why I was so desperately wanting food now, was because I was so hungry. And because of that, my emotional stability was all over the place. I would be up and down all the time, because when you're hungry, you're just not grounded or able to manage your emotions when that's happening. So I did sort of quote unquote relaxed a bit and would be like, okay, maybe I'll miss a workout today and actually watch some TV with you. But because it was so tight, me keeping my weight down, my weight would start to go up as soon as I did that. And that freaked me out. So then I was like, I need to double down. I need to go hardcore about this. I cannot let my weight go up. This is just not okay. And I would start weighing myself every day and in the mornings. And my husband said to me after, he's like, I didn't know who was going to come out of the bathroom in the morning, because if my weight went up a pound, like, watch out, my day would be ruined, because I was so upset that I gained weight and so fearful. So I really got to this point where I call it hitting my diet bottom, which I had come across this really restrictive diet that is, books are out there. It's this person is, she's got a following, and it was super, super restrictive. When I look at it now, I'm like, oh, it's just a sanctioned eating disorder. Like, that's what this is. But it's called a diet, and it's seen as totally acceptable, because I know that the people who were on it were so severely strict with it. It's the only way they could lose weight and keep it off. And I know that because I was one of them. And so it was a very, very strict diet, and it cost a lot of money. And it was the night before I was about to start it. And at the time, I was working as a meeting and event planner. So I would travel across the country and be running events at hotels and all over the place. And I would be on planes a lot and in hotels a lot. And this program required that you meticulously, monitored your food. And I thought, how am I going to do this? Like, I don't know how I'm going to do this if I'm traveling on planes and I'm in hotels and I'm across the country for a week. Like, I'm nowhere near home. And so I remember the night before sending an email, or maybe it was on their Facebook group, I'm not sure, saying, how do I manage this? Like, and they're like, oh, just pack your food. And I thought, how am I going to pack my food for a week? Like, firstly, like, vegetables aren't going to stay, like, good in a suitcase for a week. Like, I was like, what? And I went to bed that night and I just broke down. I was sobbing. And I'm like, I can't do this. I can't do this. This can't be my life. I don't want to live my life like this. So that was when things really started to break. I canceled the diet program. I'm like, I'm not doing this. And that's when things started to open up to this different path. So fast forward, or backtrack like a little bit earlier to that, maybe about 8 months prior to that, I was searching, how do I stop emotionally eating? And I came across intuitive eating. Like, Google would come up, and I looked into it and I thought, okay, well, that sounds nice, but I'm going to gain weight if I do this. So no, like, ixnay, the intuitive eating, cannot do this, continue with the dieting. But that was implanted in my head. And I thought, maybe it's time to look into this. Like, maybe now is the time that I can revisit this. Now, at the same time, I'd also started hearing about body positivity, and I came across this book called Health at Every Size. And that really blew things open for me, because so much of what I thought was just fact and truth about food, weight, health, really, I got completely turned upside down. And it made a lot more sense what they were telling me and what I was reading in these books and listening to. I was listening to a lot of podcasts with experts talking about this. I'm like, oh, this makes so much sense. And then I also started hearing stories of people kind of similar to mine, stories of fitness professionals who on the cover looked like the picture of health, but really secretly they were suffering with an eating disorder. And seeing how common that was in the fitness industry and then these different fields, I thought, oh my gosh, so all these people I look up to who think it just must be easy for them, so many of them are secretly actually really struggling just like I was. But they felt like they had to keep it up because they're a fitness professional and they have a look and they have an image. And that was similar to me being a yoga teacher. I remember I did a life coach training around this time, and the person doing the training said, I don't know what I was talking about, but she stood up and she was like, "You're the picture of health." And yet, I was so deeply suffering mentally, emotionally, even physically, because I would be tired. I would get colds and get sick all the time. And I thought, she thinks I'm the picture of health and has no idea what I'm dealing with, because we are so conditioned to believe that a thin body equals a healthy body and healthy person, which just isn't actually the case. So I quit dieting cold turkey. I threw up my scale and went down. Really, it's a years long process of recovering from this, because I gained weight rapidly. And that freaked me out, of course. And I had to face all of those fears that were coming up. So immediately, at one point, the comments stopped. I used to, whenever people would see me, they would say, if they hadn't seen me in a while, they're like, "Oh my God, you look gorgeous." They would always comment on my appearance, tell me how beautiful I was. And those comments stopped. It was like, no more beautiful comments. Nobody said anything to me. And I felt that. And now all of a sudden, all this, feeling of not good enoughness, shame, unworthiness started coming up. Well, I started really using a lot of the tools. And at that point, the professional and spiritual work that I'd come to help me through this process. So a lot of it was, just some plain old emotional releasing. At one point, I remember being on the couch and just sobbing as if somebody died. It felt like this was actually another real turning point in what I will call my recovery from dieting, was feeling like this old me, this version of me, the health and wellness person, the thin person who was seen as beautiful and acceptable and everything from other people, was gone. She died. And I knew I couldn't go back, because I tried at one point. At one point, I thought, well, maybe I can be a little bit generous now with my calories, because I was a calorie counter. That's how we did it. So I thought, I'll just give myself a little bit more leeway. And I did it for about 4 days. And it was like I had walked myself back in a cage and shut the door behind me. I just felt that I was trapped. I felt the stress. And I was like, damn it, I can't do this anymore. And it sucked, because I often use this analogy when I'm talking with clients going through this. It's like, you're on one end of this tunnel and you got to get to the other side of it. But it's, you can't, as when you're going in the middle of it, you can't even really see the light at the end. There's little twists and turns in the tunnel, so it blocks the light. And it's scary. And you get to a point, you start to walk in it and it feels too frightening. And so you want to run back to the light that right? You want to run back outside and say, okay, but I know this. And then it's like, but damn it, I can't live here anymore. So you go back in again, and it's that inner fortitude to keep facing all of this that comes up. So it was a lot of emotional work, a lot of facing the fears over and over again, wearing a bathing suit for the first time bigger, having a belly, which I was always so worried about my belly all the time. And now I have a belly, I have rolls, it's there. And facing it every time, going out in summer for the first time with bigger arms and being afraid to show my arms, it was all there. And I just had to keep facing it and really do the inner work to really see, actually, this is all story. This is not my fault. I did not come into this world thinking that my body was wrong. I was perfectly fine and healthy as a child until one day I learned that for some reason, this body size wasn't okay. I'm like, this is conditioned into me. This isn't mine. This is not mine. And I'm looking around and I'm like, oh my God, everybody else is suffering with it too. But they think that it's what they're supposed to do, or they're too afraid to actually allow themselves to just be in their body size because of everything that, I described that you have to go through. But thankfully, on the other side of it, it's like all it did was brought me now to the deeper part within me where the reservoir of my own worth, my own value is there. It's like I am that, and my body size is not, and how I look is not an indicator of that. That's just conditioned thinking from the culture. And I can't help right now that most people can't see that, but all I need to do is see it for myself. And so it was been a long journey, but it brought me then, to here, to the point where I'm able to help people through, coaching to go through this for themselves as well, and return to the deeper value and worth that is within them, and then honor that and come from a place from the inside out of living, not looking to the outside saying, how am I supposed to be?
So you do say there is light at the end of the tunnel, because this is the story. As unique as it is to you, it isn't a unique story to most. I will say women, but men struggle with it too. It's not, it all stems down to that self-worth. Even listening to your story, it's like I could think about, I had multiple ideas come back to my head of like guys in high school saying, oh, your face is so pretty. If you could put it on your friend Natalie's body, you would be the perfect person. Cause she was like tall, supermodel, skinny. And I was actually really thin in high school and in great shape. But, it's like she had the Cindy Crawford body. She had that, no butt. I'm curvy. I had the butt type of thing. And, that's drilled into my head. Or just things like, we are just fed that as children. Just looking at magazines or anything, it's like, your weight carries so much value. I even remember at one point, I was in my 20s and hanging out with some people, and I'd been on an extremely strict diet. I was going through a nutritionist, which I don't know that this was necessarily right, where I was having to give myself shots every, like HCG or human growth hormone, some sort of shot every morning. Like, why am I right in mind when I think that this was good for me? Give myself a shot and then restrict myself to 1,200 calories or less to lose weight. And I remember like, that's all I could even talk about with people. And I had a friend pull me aside and said, no one wants to hear this. Like, if you want to do this, that's on you. And it's like, but we internalize it and it becomes this obsessive thing that's all we can see. That's all we can think about. It rules our life. And I think it is really common and it's unhealthy.
Well, it's extremely common. It's literally what like doctors and fitness and diet companies are built around. There's huge industry and tons of money that are made on exactly this. And it's so interesting when you're talking about how that's all you could talk about. It's like, our body's natural reaction to diets, like to taking in calories below what really is healthy for our bodies, and what that is for each person is kind of different. There's a range, particularly on, if you're really active or you're not, like there's all different reasons. The body just perceives that as famine, because the body is actually less likely to survive if it doesn't have enough weight on it than if it has extra weight on it. The extra weight, it's fine with, because it's like, great, like we're good in case there's a famine, we got you covered, you're safe. But as soon as you get below a certain point for your body, it's like danger. Let's get this body more fuel. And so psychologically, you start thinking about food all the time. And so not only are you having to think about food because just to restrict yourself to that amount of calories, which I know because I don't think it got that low, but close enough, takes a lot of mental mathematics and thought to prepare it all the time. You're constantly thinking about what you're eating. Can you go out and have a social life? Like, were you scanning the menus in advance for the calories?
Yes.
Like, I was like, piecing together menu options and calculating, well, what can I eat this morning? And what do I have to remove something from lunch? Like it takes up so much of your mental space, but then you're also just thinking about food all the time because you're hungry. And so your body is psychologically cueing you to think about food. And now food smells better. Like the food comes to you, you're like, oh my God, food tastes better when you're undernourished because your body wants you to eat. So it's going to cue psychologically to say, yeah, eat that food. Like, doesn't it smell good? Doesn't it taste good? Eat all of it. So there's that aspect too that you're up against, and the fact that it's just literally now become a second job in order to do this. So where does this also affect, like, what matters to you in your life really? Like, is that the thing that's bringing you fulfillment? Is having this small body, or is it connection with your friends? Is it creative pursuits? Is it spending time with your family? All of which is being taken away when we're so freaking obsessed about our food and our body. You don't have time for both. Just like my husband had actually said to me, if you didn't stop dieting, I'm not sure we would have stayed together, because that's how intense it was being with you. Because I had to walk on eggshells all the time around you, because I was underfed. I was obsessed about eating. I was so worried about it. I was emotionally dysregulated because I hadn't the strength to be able to manage my emotions. So in what world, in our world, but in what world is this actually seen as a positive, healthy way to be relating to your body and yourself? How is that a good life?
But how do you balance that? Because, I get what you're saying. You want that fulfillment and that friendship and that camaraderie that comes with going to have a meal, or, not skipping that workout so that you can watch the TV with your husband, whatever it is, you want to have that, but then you go to put on clothes and you just feel like crap about yourself, or you look in the mirror and you just don't like what you see. And whether it's a distorted image or not, it is so ingrained in us. How do you find that balance between letting go of that control and feeling good and accepting yourself? Because I know, like you're saying, it's like inner work you have to do. I know it goes deep, but it is like, I think there's a balance because look good, feel good is true. When you look good, you do feel good.
So here's the first thing that I think is really important to look at is, okay, firstly, do you ever have, I like to bring this up, do you ever have memories of when you looked good, okay? You were younger, and by all standards, you looked good. Yeah. And yet you thought you looked bad.
Yes.
Like you saw a photo and you're like, oh my God, I look terrible. And then, so this was one of the big wake up calls for me, was when I gained a bunch of weight. Now, those darn Facebook memories that would come up and show me photos of myself when I was thin and beautiful. And yes, I would look at them and I could remember in some of these photos, remembering that photo being taken and remembering how I felt when that photo was taken and when I looked at it. And I was critical of it and I did not think I looked good. And then fast forward 3 years later, that photo comes up again and I'm like, oh my God, that's what I looked like? Are you kidding me? Like, I was thin. I looked great. And I didn't for a moment, though, thought that I actually looked great. So that's the first thing. When you talk about distorted perception, like, what is great? Like, how do you know? Can you really trust that? Can you trust that if you look thin and you got your hair a certain way that you're going to feel great? You might sometimes, but there's other times that you don't. So you can't trust that. That's not a good benchmark for it. Another aspect too is to really start to look at, what have we been conditioned to believe is beautiful? So when you talk about like, think from the moment that we're born, the images and media that we are consuming. So like you said, the magazines, the advertisements, the television and movie stars, they look the same, right? They are all thin. They are all quote unquote beautiful, and also look at the narratives that are attached to that. So the sitcoms that we used to grow up in, like one of the popular ones is we talk about Friends. And there was the whole Fat Monica theme, like just ripping into Monica for being fat. And it's like immediate, you're like, oh God, this is terrible, right? Like, look at how they're treating her because she's fat. This is bad. This is bad. This is apparently ugly. And these little narratives are peppered throughout so much that we consume that we don't even know it because it's normal. So we've come to believe that it's fact. And then we also get it from our family because they've been consuming it too, or it comes through the family line, which was with my family. All the women in my family were thin when they were young and were bigger when they were older. And so in my childhood, they were all pining for those days when they were thin. So that was the narrative I got. It was like they all would go around in a circle and talk about what they weighed on the day they were married, as if like this was some holy grail trophy of them, the version of themselves that now they're like, well, I might not be worth it now, but I was then, so does that count for something? So we have to become aware of it. So we can also start to look through history and through different cultures in history before current westernization of television really took over the world, and look at that there are some cultures that actually thought bigger bodies were more beautiful. And that would be the case in history too. In fact, I remember a woman I had worked with was from Iran. And she said that when she was young, she was made fun of for being thin. And that the more general consensus was if you had some meat on you, you are more beautiful. So we come to believe that fact in our culture is, oh, well, this is what's beautiful. And now our mind compares ourselves to that. And our mind, its job is really just to physically protect us. So it looks around and it says, you might not receive love from people, which feels safe, right?
Right.
Because that's linked to your survival to belong in the group. So it looks around and says, okay, how can you make sure that you're going to most likely receive love and therefore be safe? And it looks around and it says, I know how you look, because we see here that people who are in bigger bodies get treated more poorly, and people think a whole bunch of nasty things about them, but people who are thin get treated so much better and everybody thinks they're good. So that's safe, right? So the mind then will also that's why you feel afraid to gain weight, is because the brain says you're not safe. It's like really deeply evolutionarily rooted, but you are. So we have to start questioning what is actually beautiful. Do you really, okay, this is another, I'm going to go here. And I have this guide called the Free Guide to Body Acceptance. And one of the exercises I have in there is called the Deserted Island Visualization. So I say, imagine for yourself that you grew up on a deserted island and you never saw another human body. You had no idea what any other humans looked like. How might you feel about your own? How would you feel about your body if you could not know what another human looked like? Like you had nothing to compare it to.
Yeah, you would just accept it. I don't think you would feel one way, good or bad about it at all.
That's right. Most likely you and maybe you find something about yourself as beautiful, because when are we more likely to feel and think things are beautiful is when we're in a more open and loving state. So it's why, like, you might, for example, things like you could find beauty in things that quote unquote might be considered ugly if you feel love towards it. So where really does beauty come from? I mean, yes, you could people have the argument that evolutionarily there's certain, characteristics that you're naturally drawn to, but most of them have to do with proportions. but proportionally, not size-wise. So it's like the waist to hip ratio, not the actual size of the waist and hip, but the ratio. So like if it gets bigger, the ratio's there, whatever. Is it bigger eyes? Like who knows, right? But the point is that beauty is not a fact, because over time and over history and cross-culturally, there have been different ideas and standards of beauty, and they have shifted and changed over time. So yes, we have a current day standard, but we will continue to suffer if we think that that is what we have to hold ourselves to. We need to question that. Can I open myself up? Because again, as I said, nobody's free if we believe this, because then there's always a part of you that says, I've got to meet this standard. I'm not going to be good enough. So then it comes down to the bigger part, which is the emotional piece, which is what this is really all about. Because what are you actually afraid of? Well, most people are afraid of judgment. That's what they're afraid of. And I would say this too. I actually did an Instagram post about this the other day, that I noticed that anytime I have a critical body thought that comes in my head, it's always related to a fear of being externally judged. It's never about what I really think about my body. It's about what are other people going to think about my body. And then that doesn't feel safe, because what? They're not going to have a good impression of me. Like they might not like me. Like what is it really that I'm afraid of? Because when it comes down to it, there are always going to be people who don't like me. And there's always going to be somebody who doesn't think okay. But there's always going to be people who do like me. And there's always going to be people who think I'm okay. So if I'm in alignment with myself and who I am, and I'm living true to that, then I'm going to be attracting in those people who are actually liking me for me. And I'm no longer now needing to cater to or try to change myself so that other people who aren't really truly in alignment with my true self, who only like me because I look a certain way, then I'm not going to be worrying about them. So it really comes down to, what are you afraid of? And can you actually see that you are safe in this moment?
Well, that is a huge concept, is the whole thing of fear. And I think where it even goes deeper is, like you're saying, it comes back to the survival instinct. And I think anything when it comes into our life, we can always kind of trace it back to that, the survival. So fitting in, being with the group, because that was our innate way to survive. And then that fear of not being accepted, that fear of not being welcomed into the group, that is what brings in that control. And what can you control? You can control what goes in your mouth. You can control how much you exercise. You can quote unquote, you could try to control your body, but that's all rooted in your fears. So that's what we're getting down to, is we have to uncover what we're truly afraid of. And that is usually of not being loved, not being accepted, our self-worth, not being perceived as good enough. And so the root of all of these issues, whether it's owning who we are authentically and showing up as ourselves, whether that's weight, what we say, what we do, any aspect of ourselves, all comes back to that self-love, that self-fear, that fear, and that worth.
Yeah, that's it. And so then it comes down to a point of, where are you going against what's truly in alignment and authentic for you, in order to be trying to manipulate your body and yourself to please somebody else? And so, do you really love wearing makeup? Or do you do it because you're afraid that other people aren't going to think well of you with a bare face? You know, some people love wearing makeup. Some people, it's like this artistic expression for them. They love it. Great, wear makeup. But if you're doing it because you feel like in some way you're inadequate if you don't, that's coming from a fear, and that will never be solved by the makeup. So we've also been really conditioned to seek things outside of ourselves in order to feel better. But really all we're doing is just distracting ourselves for a moment from, or I don't know if distract is the right word, but temporarily pushing away these feelings of not enoughness with a moment of saying, okay, now I'm enough. But because it takes a certain amount of effort to keep that going, you're always going to be fighting against it. So for example, like with the weight, for me, it's like I would always have to keep going with this way in order to maintain this idea of my body so I could feel good enough, which, as I shared, didn't even work to begin with.
Right.
So wasn't the solution. But it's the same thing when you hear stories of people who say, if only I get the right car, if only I have the right house, if only I have the right clothes, then I'll feel good enough. Well, you might feel good temporarily, but it's not actually what's ever going to make you feel good. It's not going to fill the hole, right? It's still there. That feeling good can only ever come from within. And the process is to start to identify and see all of the beliefs that we have come to believe about ourselves that are not true, and remove those. Remove them, question them, move them out from our life, because who we are, our worth and our value, is there already. When we come into this world as babies and children, we feel good about ourselves. We are who we are. You don't see toddlers like worrying about their hair and, pinching at their stomachs, although it starts as early as 3 years old for some kids, where they are conditioned with this idea that being fat is bad. So that's how early it can start. But prior to that, they are fully themselves, loving life. Like they love themselves, they love life, they are fine. They know their worth and their value. They don't question it. It's only until then some idea that comes in that says, no, you shouldn't be this way. Mm-hmm. You're too much. You're too little. You should look different. And then our brain, again, that survival brain, picks that up and says, oh my God, they may not love me. And when you're little, you need other people for you to survive. So it literally is feels very threatening, but it's these ideas that get conditioned in our mind that cloud over that sense of okayness and worth that we have inside of us. And so we got to start to sift through those clouds, because it will never come by adding more clouds. And that's what we're trying to do, is we're like, if I add more clouds, if I meet these ideas, I'll be okay. But it's like, no, the clouds there, it is the problem to begin with. What we need to do is clear the clouds away and notice we're okay. Because here's something else is similar to the visualization thing I often ask clients to do. If you're standing in front of a mirror and you're looking at yourself, you're like, I think I look terrible, I'm ugly, I'm too fat, whatever. Now, just for a minute, if you can, imagine that none of those thoughts were there. Just miraculously, your mind just couldn't think a thought, and you're looking at yourself in the mirror. What would you think about yourself?
I mean, I don't even know if I could answer that question right now, because I'm just so critical. Even thinking about it, I'm going back to where you're talking about pictures of you when you were younger. I'm going back in my mind as you're saying that to a time in high school when I was like, oh, I have saddlebags on my legs. I didn't. What was I thinking? And now it's like what I would give to be that size. We are so conditioned. I don't know. I don't know what I would say. I don't know. I mean, I would point out every flaw.
And
I don't know that I could do it.
You couldn't. And so here's the thing. Those flaws that you're pointing out show that there's thoughts in your head.
Yeah.
Right? Because the only way that you can have a critical thought, the only way you can be critical is if a thought comes in that says something critical.
Yeah.
So you couldn't have those thoughts. Those were gone too. It was just hard. This is a hard exercise because those thoughts will come in really fast. But the point is to really think, oh my God, what might I act? How might I feel? What do I see as I look in this reflection if I had no critical thoughts? My guess is you would feel fine.
I don't know what that would be in my mind. I can't even comprehend that.
Yeah. And so I'm a huge proponent of meditation because what meditation does is it helps us get some separation from our thinking. Because when we are caught in our thoughts, they are truth. to us. That is reality. That is what exists. That is our world. It's like, no, I'm totally critical. Well, I say, here's the thing. We have a mind, but we are not our minds. We actually are the awareness that notices our thinking and notices our feeling. And when we are dropped back into that space of awareness, that is that initial place that we come from when we're born into this world. Because our little thinking brain hasn't evolved yet, so it's not so active. But we are aware. We're not stupid. Like, we don't need the mind to be fully formed in us to be very wise and aware and know what's going on. But that feeling good place in that awareness space is our true nature. But then thought comes in and it talks to us a lot because, again, it's a survival mechanism. We can look at it like this little computer brain that we have, but it ends up then creating this identity about us. It creates this idea of who we think we are with all of these ideas of good and bad and right or wrong and whatnot. And we've come to learn to listen to it and even think that that's who we are, is whatever our mind says that we are. But that's not who we are. That's like a computer with a whole bunch of collection of thoughts. And then it tells us it's I. It says I. And we think I. We think, oh, that's I. But if you ever notice, the brain also says you. Like, it will say you are doing this, and I'm doing this. So who's I then? If the brain's saying you, and it's also saying I. So it's not us. So we actually have the ability to come into this space where we can not be attached to the thinking of the mind, which means we have some separation to it and we can see it just as thought. And when we're able to do that, those thoughts can come in and they can go. Like, they are like, there's this analogy that who we really are is like the sky and our thinking is like the weather. So the weather comes in, and that comes in the form of thoughts and feelings. And when it's there, and if we think we're the weather, then, you know, it's stormy sometimes, it's maybe gentle clouds sometimes, and things feel better. But the whole misunderstanding is that we're actually the sky, and then the weather comes through. And when we can step back into that sky space, then when all the thoughts come in, like, oh, you're ugly, you're not good enough, you need to lose weight, nobody's going to like you, you're going to be single forever, like blah, 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 blah. We can be like, okay, I see you. And I notice that I'm still here. And do I notice that I'm okay? Is that actually true? And another thing I always tell people too is that we have this like built-in barometer within our system to let us know if that thinking that's coming in is actually really true or not. And it's based on how we feel. So if we feel bad, if a thought comes in that's like, you're ugly, and we feel bad about that, that's actually our system saying, there's a flaw in that thinking. That's not actually entirely true. Like that's questioned. You can question that. That's not true. And so that's how we know. But we've come to think that our thoughts are true. We don't question them. And even more so, we think that our thoughts are us. But they're not really us. They're coming from a mind, this survival computer mind that is running on its own, but that's the weather and we're the sky. And so that's a really important piece that can serve you so well in this process of breaking free from this conditioning, and to then know, well, what do I really think? The real me. Do I really think I'm ugly? Do I really hate my body? Do I really want to go on this diet? Do I really want to be doing this exercise class 5 times a week? Is this the movement that I actually enjoy? Do I really want to be eating this keto burger? Like we can, like, then we get in touch with what is it that we really want? What is it we really enjoy? What is it that actually makes us feel good? And not from the, I feel good because now I feel safe but I feel good because this feels good in my body. This brings me joy. This allows me to be fully engaged in my life because I know that I'm good and worthy as I am.
But taking that I mean, you can go to an extreme with that too. You can go to the extreme like, do I want to do this? No, I don't want to eat this keto burger. I want to eat that double cheeseburger over there. And that's not also healthy. So like, where does that intuitive side come in? You know, it's like, do I want to sit on the couch and eat this bag of Doritos?
Yeah.
Yes, I do. Like, that's going to make me happy right now, but I'm not going to feel good about myself later. So how do you find that balance?
that is such an important question, and is like the most common question. And that is the thing that stops people from even going on this journey, because they're like, excuse me, if I wasn't, monitoring my weight, I would just be Netflixing and Doritoing for the next week.
Yes.
So I get that. And here's what I'm going to say to that. And this is something that most people will be like, I don't know about this, but I know because I went through it. So another analogy that I like to use is, imagine a rubber band being pulled back, right? So the further you pull the rubber band back, the further it's going to fly when you let go of it, right? That makes sense. So the further you are restricting yourself from eating, the further you're going to want to go off the deep end when you allow yourself to eat whatever you want. So imagine it's like the only way that rubber band is going to stop flying is when it's expended all of its energy and it just drops to the ground. But you can't make it stop mid-flight. What most people do is they'll grab the rubber band and then be like, nope, I'm going to start pulling it back again because I don't like how far that's going. So whenever we stop dieting, the initial reaction is going to be likely binging. Could turn out into, now what binging means, like that's different for everyone. But what it usually shows up as is eating all of the things that you previously did not allow yourself to eat. Because there is too much energy that is pent up in this restriction. That energy has to go out. Now, most people will never make it through this phase because there is another side to it. They'll never let the rubber band drop because it's flying and they're like, holy shit, excuse me, I don't know if I can swear. They're like, oh my goodness. They're like, it is going way too far. And that is too scary. So like I said, they grab the rubber band mid-flight and hold on to it and pull it back again. And like, nope, you're staying where I've got you in control. So what needs to happen is that energy has to go out. So you need to allow yourself to eat the Doritos or the whatever you want on the couch for as long as you feel like you want to do it, without restriction. Now, like, again, this is going to make people be like, WTF? No, no. And I get that, because that's where I was at when I first came across intuitive eating. When I told you like 8 months prior to stopping, I was like, no, hard no. Like, I'm not doing this. But you need to be able to let that out, because not only is it, sometimes it can be a physical restriction. Like if you've been physically restricting for so long, this is very common in people who are recovering from eating disorders, is their body has been so starved from calories for so long, they actually go through a refeeding phase where it's like they get more hungry and they feel like they're never going to stop eating. And that's really common. And they need to go through that phase in order, because if you think about it, dieting actually breaks trust with the body. The body says, I never know if you're going to feed me. I don't know if I'm actually going to get what I need or if I'm going to get enough. I don't trust you anymore. So it's like you're having to rebuild this trust with your body that it knows you're going to give it enough food, that it's not actually in starvation anymore. This isn't just a like cheat day meal. This isn't like, oh, I went off the wagon for a little bit and now I'm back on the diet. It's like, no, this is forever, body. I promise I'm never going to starve you again. I'm never going to deny what you need again, but that's going to take time to build trust. So the body needs to know that. And so when it eventually feels like it's safe again, it will settle down. But the other part is the mental restriction piece. All the times that we're like, this food is good, this food is bad. That's mental restriction. I can only eat so much of this. I can only eat during this time. I can't eat during this time. I can only eat, whatever. There's all of these different ways that we mentally restrict. So again, when psychologically we have what's called food freedom, where everything becomes neutral. And I know that this sounds weird saying like broccoli is neutral to cupcakes, but because we know that it's not, like the nutrition is different. We know it's not the same, but when psychologically it's the same, meaning it's not morally good or bad for me to eat broccoli versus a cupcake. Now, this is when we can get to a point where everything settles down again, because intuitively eating requires that we actually really check in with ourselves and says, what feels good to me? It means we drop out of the brain, which has all of the ideas of what I should or shouldn't be eating, all of the rules, all of the fear. Because here's the thing, if you get honest with yourself, watching Netflix and eating pizza and ice cream every day for a week is not going to feel good.
No.
In fact, it's probably not going to feel good for 3 days or even 2 days. Like, it doesn't matter what that is for you. You're not going to feel good. So eventually, if you're really in tune with yourself and you say, I want to feel good, you're not going to want to do that anymore. But we don't get to that place. People don't get to that place because of the fear of the out of control. And here's the other thing. Diets provide structure. They give us a sense of control. It feels safe. So when all of a sudden it's like food freedom, baby, no rules, that can feel scary.
Yeah.
Especially, now we're getting a little deeper too, but when other things maybe aren't going well in your life, are you struggling in a relationship? Are you having a tough time at a job? We can go to diets, like, again, as a way to feel in control. I can't control these things in my life, or I don't feel happy in these areas, but I know that I can control this. And now we're letting that go. Well, what can I rely on now? And this is where it's like, it comes now from within. So this is where I say, knowing that you're not your mind, that you have a different, deeper source of intelligence within you, the same intelligence that knows how to grow an oak tree from, whatever, is it an acorn into a tree? That intelligence that grows flowers is within us too. And that guidance is going to show us what feels good for us to eat, what is good movement. But we have to go through that dark tunnel. We have to go through that scary phase where we feel out of control. We don't know what to do. We're faced with all of these emotions. It can be a rough space. I'm not going to lie. It's why people aren't doing it. It's why most people aren't doing it. But it gets to the place then where we find this deeper grounding within ourselves, this deeper anchor, and it helps stable us so that no matter what is going on within the world, we are grounded and anchored in our truth, in our knowing, and being guided by this intuition, this deeper intelligence, this deeper sense of knowing. But the only place we can access that isn't up here in our mind. It's in a deeper place. I often say it's like an access within our heart. Yeah. We feel it within our body, but we have to be able to go through that place because we are designed to be well. That is our innate nature. We will always move towards what makes us feel better. We will always move in that direction. But what we do right now is we say, I feel fear because I'm afraid of being judged, or I'm afraid of feeling out of control. So feeling better feels like being in control or meeting somebody else's expectation. But that's not going to work if that's out of alignment with our deeper truth. And this is what we're normally doing. And it only ever works usually temporarily. So we need to tap into that deeper part of us and then what's true well-being? So true well-being may be eating sometimes chocolate chip cookies, as many as you want, knowing that you're not a bad person for doing it. You're not going to get diabetes if you do that. You're not going to gain 1 million pounds if you do that. Like, it's okay to eat it. And when food is neutral, you're going to get to a point where it's like, I actually don't want to be eating a plate of cookies. You don't and actually on that note, I'm going to tell you, when I was dieting, I thought I was a sugar addict. I thought I was addicted to sugar because I couldn't let alone a plate of cookies. I couldn't have chocolate in the house. I couldn't I couldn't have a bag of chips sitting there without eating the whole thing. And the only way I could stop myself was to trash it. Right. Mm-hmm. So I thought I was addicted to sugar. Well, when I stopped dieting and I went through this recovery phase, when I let that rubber band drop, all of a sudden chocolate was sitting in my desk at work for a week. And I was like, what? Like, I don't want to eat it. I don't understand. Who am I? Like, that was my identity. Like, I used to bake all the time, and my friends are deeply disappointed in the fact that I do not bake like I used to. I baked because I just wanted to eat sweets all the time because I was so restrictive. And now I'm like, I don't really think about baking that much anymore. So while my body size is bigger, I feel so like I rarely get sick anymore. And surprise, surprise, I like do movement every single day. I eat salads. I actually don't eat a lot of chips and cookies and stuff because I don't crave it anymore. So I have this balance. I crave sometimes having fruit and vegetables, and like, I just eat whatever feels good to me. And I don't overeat as much either because I'm not like trying to get in that meal before I start my next diet, or this is my cheat day, so I got to go big or go home. Like I'll never know when I get it again. It's like, I can eat it whenever I want. So whatever, I'll get it whenever I want. Now, do I really want it? Yeah.
Well, I mean, even that, talking about, you were saying we come in just so intuitively, like in tune with our body. You know, I have young kids and I watch, like, you give them, if they want a scoop of ice cream after dinner or something, they'll walk away with it like half in the bowl still because they're just done. They're good. They got what they wanted and they're off playing. And to me, it's like in my mind, I'm going, wait, you're going to leave that? Like, I gave you more. Like, why aren't you going to finish that? And it's like, I'll rush to finish it up myself, you know? And it's that conditioning that comes. I mean, Hayden's 2, so he hasn't hit that mark where it's like he's got all that outside influence saying, don't eat this. This is not okay. So that is interesting. Going back to that, like, your body will tell you when you're done.
We are born intuitive eaters. And where that gets hijacked is when we innocently and inadvertently put all these rules onto our kids about food. So we don't need to force them to eat vegetables. If we just continue to offer them a wide variety of foods, because it takes, like, I think it's something 10 to 20 times of exposure for a kid to even be, I mean, I have a 2-year-old, so like, I get it, to even be open to like trying something or eating it. When there is no pressure for them to eat food, they will start to gravitate to be eating these foods. That's when we start to say, this is good, this is bad, you can only eat so much of this. Or even so, like, this was really interesting. I read this study where they actually showed that sugar highs in kids is a myth. Like, it's a myth. So they did a study where they tried to replicate it, like in a lab, so to speak.
Right.
And they could not actually find like an increased hyperactivity due to the actual sugar. They noticed, firstly, they were more hyperactive when the parents were present versus when the parents weren't present, but they couldn't replicate it. But here are the different factors that tend to go unnoticed. Usually the kids who get hyperactive in some way are restricted from the sugar. So they're only allowed to have sweets at certain times. It's usually during a celebration. It's usually for a special treat. It's usually at a kid's birthday party. Well, aren't you going to be excited when you have a special treat or a celebration, or you're at a kid's birthday party, or you finally get this delicious thing and you don't know when you're going to get it again?
Right.
So all of these different factors influence, whereas if it really was like the sugar, then you should be able to see it replicated. And it's funny, just yesterday, my daughter got her hair cut. And so I'm like, oh, I'll give her one of these little lollipops from it. Well, I expected her to just down the whole thing because she's never had a lollipop. It's pure sugar. And even it's so funny, even though I know this, I'm still conditioned with this idea of like kids in a sugar high. So I'm like, oh, this is before bed. Like, I don't know. She ate like a quarter of it and then handed it to me. And she's like, I'm done.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, okay, great. Oh, okay, in the garbage. Like I wasn't going to give it to her, that night. But
yeah,
no problem. She wasn't bonkers when she got home. And because I try to just let her, I don't make a big deal about it. I'm not like, this isn't special. This is the same as broccoli. This is neutral. So now, because again, if we have too much of something, we are going, like if you eat a giant amount of sugar, you're going to feel sick. You just are. It's not going to feel good. And you like feeling good. Well-being is your innate nature. You're going to go toward balance. Well, now if you have an exposure to a variety of different foods, your body's going to start to learn, oh, well, if I eat maybe some leafy green vegetables here, some carrots or some broccoli, that's going to balance things out for me. And I'm not going to feel, I'm going to feel better. So you start, then you just gravitate towards that because it knows this is going to help balance the sugar. You don't need a rule about it. You don't need rules. The rules are actually what mess us up because that's when we get into now not listening to ourselves and following whatever the rule of the day is. And let's be honest, these rules are changing all the time. And there's also like a million diets out there because nobody's ever found the one that's actually going to work because guess what? We're not robots. We're all humans with our unique genetics and lives and style. And we can be intuitively guided to eat exactly what works for us in any given situation at different times in our lives. Because different circumstances in our lives are going to dictate different things that we need too. It's like if I can only eat this amount of food and now all of a sudden I'm on a road trip and I don't have exposure to that, well, now there's going to be a problem and I'm going to freak out. But if I know that all foods are open, I'm going to be able to make the wisest decision for myself based on what's available to me. And I don't have to feel guilt or shame about it or worry because I know that eventually I'm going to be able to go home and have different access to food. So there's so much worry, shame, guilt, fear around food. It is insane. It's crazy. Yeah. It's not actually helping us. It's really hurting us. Where yet, if we could just let go of it, eating is not a big deal. In fact, it's very peaceful. It becomes a non-thing after a while when you know that you can trust yourself to eat and you have the best barometer inside you. And it's, how do you feel? Do you feel good when you eat that or do you not? And guess what? Everything is trial and information. Oh, I get something and I get feedback and now I know. And today that felt good and yesterday it didn't. Or I notice if I keep eating this thing at this time, I actually can't, like if I notice I keep eating this before bed, I don't sleep well. Good to know. I won't do it. But there's no rule around it. There's no should. It's common sense.
Well, you have a lot of knowledge and a lot of great advice. How would we work with you? How do we find you if we want your coaching?
So I'm at KristinaBruce.com. So it's Kristina with a K. I'm also really active on Instagram, Kristina Bruce Coach, Facebook, YouTube. I've got some individual coaching, some group coaching, webinars, free resources, a meditation group, as I was talking about earlier, is a way to start to disconnect from that critical mind so we can anchor into our deeper intelligence and our deeper truth, which is free. So lots of different ways to find me and work with you.
Wonderful. I love it. And I will put all that information in the show notes so that we can get in touch with you. But thank you so much for all the information today. I know I learned a lot and I really like this approach. It's taking that neutral approach. And I just had a conversation the other day with someone about the neutral mindset. And I love that, bringing that into the whole nutritional aspect of it. I think it changes my mindset of the way I look at things. So I think it's a wonderful way to go.
And I want to just say the one last thing is because it's about then trusting ourselves again. So we can trust ourselves and we've lost trust with that. We think we can't, but we really can. And so coming into that is really about coming into that self-trust.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for all the great information. I love it.
Well, thank you. And you're welcome.
Hopefully I'll talk to you soon. And that's it for today's Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you, Kristina Bruce, for such a great conversation with so much knowledge, such a wealth of knowledge about nutrition and intuitive eating, learning to listen to ourselves and trust our bodies again so that we can really show up as how we were born to be, as our true authentic self, and experience life more fully, less restricted, less dieting, less rules. Those only come when we're trying to control. And when we can release control and just allow ourselves to be aware and live, we can truly live our fullest expression of ourselves and our truest, happiest version of ourselves. So thank you, Kristina, for the great conversation, for all the information. And if you want to work with her, I'll put information in the show notes of how to get in touch with her. And as always, you can find Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers and Intentional Media on our website at CourtneyMyers.com. That's where you'll find all the information about our courses, books, and everything else we are doing. Can't wait to talk to you again. Bye.